From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Free Expression with Gerry Baker.
Hello again and welcome to Free Expression from the opinion page of the Wall Street Journal. I'm Gerry Baker, editor-at-large of the Journal. If you're not already subscribing to Free Expression, please do sign up at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you do your listening. This week, with less than 50 days to go to the election, a conversation with one of the rising and to some controversial stars of the Republican Party on Donald Trump, the state of the race, and the future of the GOP. Josh Hawley is a Republican senator from Missouri. Elected in 2018, he quickly established himself as one of a handful of GOP senators who embrace a more populist approach to conservatism. He's been highly critical of U.S. military intervention overseas. He opposed assistance to Ukraine, arguing the U.S. had more important priorities closer to home. He is a rare Republican who supports tougher regulation for some business sectors, most notably big tech, where he's backed measures to rein in the market power and social influence of Silicon Valley's biggest firms. He's expressed support for some labor unions in battles with their employers, even joining a picket line last year with the United Auto Workers demanding higher pay. He supports tariffs on foreign imports and sponsored a bill to pull the U.S. out of the World Trade Organization. He is, of course, a staunch defender of Donald Trump and was one of just a few Republican senators who declined to certify the result of the 2020 election, even after the storming of the Capitol by Trump supporters on January the 6th, a day when he memorably expressed solidarity with those supporters by raising a clenched fist with them ahead of the violence that later unfolded. All this has put him at odds with many traditional conservatives, and yet with Trump in firm control of the Republican Party, and with fellow populist Senator J.D. Vance as Trump's running mate, the signs are pretty strong that the party is moving in his direction. So where does it lead? And what is the future of American conservatism? I'm joined by Josh Hawley now. Senator, thanks for joining Free Expression.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk about the election, future of the Republican Party, and your role in it. But obviously, we've had big news again this week, another assassination attempt on Donald Trump, the second in 2 months. You actually published a report on Monday based on a whistleblower about the first assassination attempts and some of the clear, obvious flaws in the security protection for the former president. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what, in your impression, is going wrong right now in terms of this security?
We've actually had multiple whistleblowers, Gerry, come forward to the office over the span of the last couple of months from within the Secret Service, from within the Department of Homeland Security, from adjacent agencies. And what they have revealed is a disturbing pattern of negligence on the part of Secret Service leadership and neglect over a period of years. So some of the questions, for example, that have emerged are, why were there not Secret Service agents on the roof of the infamous AGR building there in Butler, Pennsylvania? We know from the whistleblowers that the security plan called for there to be agents or law enforcement presence on the roof where the shooter was. They also, those same plans called for there to be a security perimeter set up around that building. There was none of the above. And we could multiply those kinds of questions. Here's another set. A different set of whistleblowers told us that Secret Service agents in Butler were instructed beforehand not to ask for any additional resources for the rally, even though those same agents on the ground felt that they were understaffed. Now, the problem with this kind of thing is it contradicts what Secret Service leadership, including Acting Director Rowe, have said in public and indeed under oath. Rowe said, we never denied any resources. Rowe said that, we followed the security plan on the day. That's not what whistleblowers tell me. So here's the issue, Gerry. I think we have a pattern here now of leadership not being forthcoming with the American public or Congress, not leveling with us about their own failures, and not taking any action. I mean, what have they done? And here we have a second assassination attempt, and I think those questions are more pertinent now than ever.
What's the problem, do you think? I mean, there's been reports that, they've withheld resources for protection of the former president, for whatever reason that may be. Do you get the sense that it's a systemic problem there, or is it simply some people making bad decisions?
Well, I think it is a set of bad decisions being made, but I think it's systemic in the sense that I'm beginning to worry about the culture and leadership at the top. I mean, you look at what they have done with their budgets over the last 20 years. We have seen a reduction in available manpower, even as their budget has increased. And the acting director, I'm told by yet a different whistleblower, and this is also in the report, that the acting director played a leading role in reducing some of the key divisions that deploy into the field for events like the Butler County rally. These are folks who are supposed to go in ahead of time, They're supposed to look over the site plan. They're supposed to do a sweep of the site. They're there to deal with particularly line of sight concerns, which obviously ended up looming large in Butler. And that particular division, this director has cut back. So I think we need to get some answers from Secret Service leadership. I mean, what have they been doing with their funding, not just in the last year, but in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years? And then we've got to ask about, as it relates to Trump, I mean, what's the deal? I mean, why isn't he getting the same level of protection as Biden? I think at this point, it's pretty clear he needs it. And just take the golf course. Why wasn't the golf course perimeter swept, for example? I mean, we've got lots of former agents out there publicly saying that would have been protocol. I haven't heard an answer yet as to why it wasn't done. These are the kind of things I think we've got to get the answers to.
What do you stand on this issue that some people have raised, the rhetoric, on both sides, arguably, but the rhetoric about President Trump in particular from Democrats? That President Trump himself has blamed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to some extent for some of the things they've said about them as kind of inciting people to, crazy people to go out there and shoot him. Do you think there is blame on the part of the president, the vice president?
Well, I think we can take this most recent shooter or would-be shooter at his own words. I mean, when you look at his social media, what we have of it, I think there's lots more out there, but what we have seen so far is him regurgitating slogans from the Harris campaign. And it's not just any slogan. It's the worst kind of democracy is about to end. We have to take decisive action. In his case, that meant trying to shoot Donald Trump. I mean, I do think that the Harris campaign and the left needs to realize when you call your opponent Hitler, when you say repeatedly, this may be our last election, democracy itself is on the ballot, that is going to have a destabilizing effect, to put it mildly, on nutcases like this Routh guy and like Thomas Crooks, the first shooter. So I think that this is a time for everybody can always take stock about their rhetoric, but I think particularly when you've had Trump himself targeted twice in 2 months, clearly politically motivated, I think it's time for the left to say, listen, we've gone way too far. Calling him Hitler, I mean, come on.
I mean, Trump himself has said some pretty extreme things about his opponents, about the media, about immigrants. I mean, he's no stranger to some pretty hostile rhetoric, is he?
Yeah, but Jerry, I think that this is not the time after the president has been shot at twice or shot in the face once and had attempted assassination a second time. I don't think that this is really the time for the good people on both sides. I mean, when you have people acting on the rhetoric of the left, clearly there's a problem. And I just say, listen, I mean, everybody can take responsibility for turning down the temperature and not demonizing their opponents. I mean, let's have a spirited debate that's based on substance and is not based on calling each other Hitler. But I think when you look at the rhetoric of the left and the Harris campaign in particular, including, Jerry, post July 13th, even after the first assassination attempt, when you still see this overheated Armageddon rhetoric, I mean, it's dangerous. And I think we can say conclusively now that it has had an effect on these unstable people. So let's just stop it. I'd like to see, I think it would be a moment of great leadership for Harris to come out and say, you know what, I've gone too far in the past and I'm better than that. And my campaign is going to be better than that. And we're going to do better in the final 6-7 weeks of this campaign.
Let's talk about the election. Polling suggests, I'll quote you some numbers, huge disapproval of the job that President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are doing. Very, very significant negative numbers, underwater numbers for Joe Biden. Huge number of people think the country's on the wrong track, heading in the wrong direction. And yet, according to the polls, the race is close. And, I'm quoting the Real Clear Politics average right now. Kamala Harris seems to have about a 2-point lead. What's going on when so many people are so unhappy with the state of the country and very unhappy with this administration? And yet the candidate of this administration seems to be winning.
Well, I don't buy that she is winning. If you look at the battleground polls, Trump is ahead in almost every one of those. I think he's on track to win this election. But listen, this is always going to be a close election. This is an incredibly polarized country politically. And, I think that no matter who was on the ballot, whether it was Biden or Harris, and certainly Harris is a better candidate for them than Biden is. But at the end of the day, I think the Trump campaign will ultimately be successful in pointing out the truth, which is that she's the sitting vice president of the United States. Her policies in the last 3.5 years have led to utter wreckage. And what she wants to do is not change direction. She wants to double down. And Jerry, I think this is a simple election choice this year. I think this election itself is pretty simple. It's, do you want to continue on the direction we're on, or do you want to change course? It's really a 1980 style election. That's the question. And Trump is the change candidate. I think she's tried to bill herself as the change candidate, which of course is smart. I mean, that's what she needs to do. But I just don't think that will ultimately be successful. We're
going to take a short break there. When we come back, I'll have more with Senator Josh Hawley on the election, Donald Trump, and the future of the Republican Party. Stay with us.
You're listening to Free Expression with Gerry Baker. Don't forget, you can listen to the latest episode anytime on your smart speaker. Just say, play the Opinion Free Expression podcast. Now, back to Gerry Baker.
Welcome back. I'm with Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, one of the more populist identifying Republican members of Congress. And we're talking about the future of the Republican Party and indeed of the country. Let's talk about the type of Republican Donald Trump is and the type that you are and indeed what the future of the Republican Party is. You know, you've carved out a kind of a different kind of Republican position than perhaps we've traditionally seen over the last 30 or 40 years. You know, you probably don't like the term, but you've been sort of described as one of the handful of Republican senators on the sort of populist side. And, you know, let's talk about it. You've been supportive of some tougher regulation on businesses, particularly big tech. You've supported tariffs on trade. You have expressed some sympathy and solidarity with unions in some of their fights against workers. You know, you've argued for a new kind of a Republican Party that addresses, maybe in a more appealing way, addresses the concerns of working people than it has before. Is that, do you think, again, you're still something of an outlier in terms of where most Republican senators seem to be, but do you think that there is a kind of, again, for want of a better word, populist conservatism that is going to be the defining future of the Republican Party?
Well, I think if we're going to be a majority party, and I mean a true majority party that can command a majority of the popular vote, that can command majorities in both houses of Congress, then I think we've got to be the party of working people. And, you know, President Reagan, as you remember and well know, President Reagan's winning majority electoral coalition was full of Reagan Democrats who were blue-collar union voters. And I think the Republican Party of the last 30 years has made a mistake in moving away from many of those voters, both tonally but also substantively in terms of our policy. And I'd also just point out, Gerry, you can go back further than Reagan. You can go back to the beginnings of the party in the late 19th century and to our heyday a century ago, our heyday at that time in the McKinley-Roosevelt era. We were the party both of American industry, and unabashedly so. We were the party of the tariff, the party that was pro-American industry and pro-worker. And we built a large majority on that for 20, 30 years, and then Reagan did it again. So I think it's in our bones, so to speak. And I'd like us to return to being that kind of party. I think the reason Donald Trump won the nomination in 2016, won the election, the reason I think he'll win it again this year is because he speaks to working people. He speaks to that potential governing coalition. And I think that's going to be our future if we're going to be a majority party.
And what does that mean? Does that mean targeted measures maybe for working people, whether it's in the form of tax credits or tax reductions? Does it mean, would you even favor redistribution from, you know, wealthier Americans or capital towards labor and towards working people? I mean, what in practical terms would you like to see this sort of new Republican Party do for American workers?
Well, I think that in broad strokes, it means nationalism. It means nationalism economically. It means nationalism in foreign policy. It means asking ourselves what will make America strong and what will make American workers and the American working class strong. So I do think that we need to, when we start talking about specifics, that we do need to take specific steps to strengthen America's working class. I think, you know, President Trump has talked a lot about tax cuts. He's proposed some new ones here on the trail that I think would be tremendously helpful to working Americans. No taxes on tips, overtime pay. I'm in favor of those. I mean, I think that those are geared towards helping working people who are living on those tips, who are living on overtime pay, helping them get a leg up. And I think that's the kind of thinking that Republicans need to demonstrate. We need to make sure that we get jobs in this country. I mean, Gerry, I'm a huge critic of what's happened since the year 2000 when we admitted China to the WTO. It's cost us almost 4 million jobs in the country. In my state alone, state of Missouri, we have lost tens of thousands of jobs overseas. These are blue-collar, working-class jobs largely. That is just not sustainable. It is not sustainable to have fewer and fewer working class jobs. I think we should want to have a country where if you were a blue collar worker, by which I mean you didn't graduate from college with a 4-year degree, you're, you know, earning not six figures, you ought to be able to get a good job that you can sustain a family on. That ought to be our goal economically. I think of that as a form of economic nationalism. I think that's broadly where Donald Trump is, and I think that's where the party needs to be.
You've mentioned Ronald Reagan, I think, twice already in this brief conversation we've had. Ronald Reagan famously, of course, won the Cold War, helped to win the Cold War at least, by facing down America's enemies. Do you think Ronald Reagan would join you in declining to support assistance to Ukraine in its fight against Russia?
Well, I hope that what he would say, and listen, let me just speak for myself. I hope that what we can say is that we've got to focus on what our top threats are. Our top overseas threat is China. This is something that even this administration's own national defense strategy, at least nominally, recognizes. They say that China is the pacing threat. That's the jargon that they usually use. And that's right. China is. Here's my take on this, Jerry, is that we cannot do all things at once. We can't be all things to all people. What's that mean? I think it means in Europe, just to get down to brass tacks, we have to have a serious conversation with our allies. I think we need NATO more than ever. I think we need to say to our NATO allies, we're going to have to share the burden here in this new world. This isn't a unipolar world anymore. This is a multipolar world. China is a peer competitor to us. Russia is still a very significant threat, not least because of their nuclear weapons. So to our NATO allies, we need to say to them, we need you to take the lead in the conventional defense of Europe. We, in turn, we the Americans, will take the lead in deterring China. Only we are positioned to do that. That's the kind of burden sharing I think we need. We can start in Ukraine, Jerry. We should say to our European allies, we need you to take the lead when it comes to the Ukraine conflict and to deterring Russia. We'll provide the nuclear umbrella, but we need you to do that conventionally, and we will, in turn, focus on China. I just think that we have to be honest that unless we're going to spend $3 trillion a year on defense, we cannot fight simultaneous wars in simultaneous theaters, multiple theaters, rather. Our military is not sized or scaled for that. We've got to be honest with the American people about where we are, and we've got to rank our threats accordingly.
Well, again, on foreign policy, on the Middle East, again, you've been a strong supporter of Israel. What do you think, if Donald Trump were to win in November, again, there's talk about a wider deal possibly involving Saudi Arabia, kind of a Abraham Accords 2 that could be some sort of a resolution. What's your sense of that? What does Israel need to do? What do the other Middle Eastern countries need to do to actually bring a lasting peace to that region?
Well, this administration has invited just exactly the kind of chaos that we're seeing all over the world, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the Taiwan Straits. They have invited it with their weakness and their utter lack of focus, direction, or clear policy. And I think nowhere is that more apparent than in the Middle East and with regard to Israel. I mean, the truth is, I just can't imagine the October 7th attacks happening under a Trump presidency. That's a counterfactual, obviously. We'll never know the answer to that. But the truth is, this administration, I think, is sending a dangerous and equivocating message by saying, oh, we stand with Israel sort of, kind of, some of the time. We'll pick and choose when. We're not exactly clear. We should say clearly that we will support Israel's right to defend itself, clearly that we support their right to root out the reach of terrorist organizations that are on their borders, beginning with Hamas. And then I think that kind of clear direction, Jerry, and support for our arguably most important ally in the region, one of our most important allies in the world, the state of Israel. I think that sort of clear message would help return momentum to, perhaps I should say, the diplomatic process that we saw under the last administration, particularly with the Saudis. But you just cannot equivocate on this. I mean, Israel is in a fight for its own existence, day and night. They're facing now threats on multiple fronts, literally multiple borders. And I think that we need to be clear. Listen, Israel's not asking us to fight their war for them. They don't want us to put troops on the ground. But they're asking us to stand with them internationally, and they're asking us to supply them critical weapons. I think we should do that without any hesitation, and we should make it clear that we will never, ever acquiesce to any attempt to destroy or destabilize the state of Israel. I think that would be the groundwork then for a peace process that could begin to go forward along the lines in the direction that it was going forward under the last administration.
We're going to see outcome of all these events in the course of the next exciting 7 weeks or so until the election. Senator Josh Hawley, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this week. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks very much for joining us. In the meantime, have a great week and goodbye.